well, it's just pretty famous. The most sermon ever preached, the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus shares so many important things about what it means to live and follow after the Father. And here in Matthew chapter 5, we're actually going to be really focusing on verses 13 through 16 today, on what it means to be the church. But even in the process of all this, there are just some things I want to kind of remind you of. The purpose of the church is to glorify the Lord. We have talked about so many different things and who you are and why that's important. Being the church is more than just being a building. I hope you realize these things, right? We're blessed to have a good building, but if we didn't have a building, we should understand that we are still the church. We are God's body and an opportunity for other people to see Him work and for Him to work through us in everything that we do. I remember growing up, if anybody asked me anything about church, I only thought about my church building. Anybody else, you thought about that? You're like, well, what do you think about church? I'm like, well, it kind of smells like old ladies and flowers in the lobby. And you're like, no, I'm not talking about that. Did anybody else in church growing up smell like that? Okay, a couple of you. Did you go to church with me? But there's just, I had family, whenever I go to their church, they lived over west of us, and whenever we'd go visit their church, you just walked in and it just had a smell, Not a bad smell, just a very flowery kind of, almost like a funeral home kind of smell. Now you know. I just said that, you know exactly what I meant. And I just remember, I can still, if I walk anywhere around and I smell that smell even today, I feel like I'm at my family's church back in that little town. And so I love that there is like a heartfelt thing about the building, but the church is more than that. It's more than just this place. In all seriousness, the early church, they didn't even have opportunities to, be in a building. They were in homes, and there's kind of a moment here in the last few years for home churches to be real trendy and kind of take off. Anybody notice that? Well, I love the intimacy that comes in inviting people into your home and that aspect and stuff like that. We don't need to think that just because the early church had house churches that is why they were doing it. They were not trying to make people feel super comfy. They were trying to keep one another alive and worship the Lord. And so it's not about a building. It was about the gathering of God's people, the body, the church. And so whenever you think about the church, I would encourage you to identify with First Baptist Church, but more than that, I would hope that you identify with Jesus. And we talked about the scripture that He is the head of the body, the church. He is the one who leads us. Now, your pastor is, I'm your under shepherd, right? I would say that. Like, I help make decisions, I help lead us in different things, I help guide, I help counsel, I help encourage, I cry with you, I cry a lot just about myself, much less what we're doing as a church. But the leader of who we are is Jesus. And everything that we do as the church goes through Him. He directs everything, He guides everything, and it has to come from His heart. And so whenever we begin to think about then what does that look like and how do we live this life, we've talked about some different things. Today we're going to talk about why that's important and actually even a very literal description of who we are as followers of Christ. In the Sermon on the Mount in chapter 5 of Matthew, the first 12 verses are known as the Beatitudes. Anybody ever heard of the Beatitudes? I would love to go through that in the sermon series sometime, maybe soon. There's a lot there, but let me just touch on that quickly, just understanding that we have to realize that Jesus is King in our life. Not only is He just the head of who we are as a church, He's the King of everything that we do. He's the King of my heart. We sing that song, that lyric in songs all the time, right? that he would be the king of my heart. But what does that really look like? Well, we have to make sure that he is the one who is getting all of the praise, all of the glory in our life, and he's the one who changes our heart, our entire heart, our attitude, our perspective is his. He's central to who I am. Anything that takes his place is idolatry, and we begin to worship those things. And so, as Jesus preaches through the opening of the Sermon on the Mount, and he goes through the Beatitudes, he talks about different people and what will happen because of them, and what rewards come from a certain heart in him. And he's really helping us to understand that his heart and our heart are really not always lined up, but whenever our heart lines up with who he is, then we need to make sure that we realize that he is king. I'm going to call a timeout. I know we've been working on the live stream. I got completely distracted. Haley, are we having kids' church today? We can. Do you want to? I know Jared's gone. All right. I know if you're a guest here today, this is the way we roll. Yeah. She's got it. If we could have one more adult with Haley, that'd be awesome. Jared's gone. That threw me off. Hey, that's on me. First and third grade. If you want to go to kids' church, they worked hard on preparing that, and I didn't mean to ignore it. So first and third grade, you're dismissed. Thanks, Leslie. You rock. All right, cool. If I were in first or third grade, I would get with you guys. All right. Anybody else? You just get up and go. If anybody else wants to go to kids' church and not listen to me, you're welcome to go hang out with them too. Good. Sit in your stick foot. I was like, oh, good. The righteousness of who God is and what we are trying to be as his child is so important. Whenever we are following after Christ, we are rewarded for those things. And friends, listen to me. That's not why we do everything in this life, just to get credit. Although I will tell you, if you've ever been through Gary Chapman's 5 Love Languages, did anybody ever do that book or that study? Okay, so there are 5 love languages that he points out. He's a Christian counselor, and so as he writes this book, it really makes sense of biblically how we're wired, and he talks about how you have quality time. You feel most loved whenever you have quality time with people. Acts of service, and these all come from the heart of the Lord, I believe. Acts of service, words of affirmation is another one. Receiving gifts or giving gifts, and then physical touch. And so those are the 5 love languages of an individual. And I look at who we are as the church, Christ's bride, and I think through the heart of the Lord and how we are rewarded for all these things. My number one my number one gift is sarcasm. I'm pretty sure it's in scripture somewhere. But my number one love language, my primary love language, is words of affirmation. I feel most loved whenever someone says to me, hey, I noticed this about you, you're doing a good job. If somebody is critical of me, it cuts me deep. I'm okay with having a heart that is open and ready for change because the Lord is a redeemer. Thank God he's a redeemer. And he watches over me, but words of affirmation for me is primary in understanding love in my life. And so whenever I look at this and I think through the Beatitudes, one of the things we have to be very careful of is to not be in it only for affirmation. And whenever we get to these next passages that we dive into here in just a minute, there is an important aspect of what Jesus is going to say to us that involves that very thing. You don't have to get credit for it. Bob Goff, who is a speaker and an author, he said, just because you do something good for Jesus doesn't mean you have to make a pudding every time you do it, right? We don't have to advertise on social media just because the Lord laid something on our hearts or we did something in love through Christ. We don't have to do all of those things, but there is a reward that is coming for those who follow Christ. And that's the purpose of the Beatitudes, is whenever you have the heart that lines up to who God is in your life, there is a reward for those who are like him. We'll go into that another day, actually another series probably, but if you look on the influence of who we are as kingdom people, the church is where we get to in verses 13 through 16, the influence that we have in that. If you would look at verse 13 of chapter 5 of Matthew, Jesus goes on to say this: you are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. Verse 14, you're the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. The righteousness of the church, the followers of Christ, it has to do an important thing. It has to impact our world around us. And so if we're going to talk about being the church and understanding that we are the church, then what we do and the way that we live our life, we have to understand that there is a requirement that what we do, it has to impact the world. There's these two pictures here, these word pictures that are laid out here. He starts out with salt. Anybody like salt? Just admit it, right? Anybody sit down at a meal? Oh man, I worked with a guy in the church one time. It didn't matter where we sat down. It was really offensive whenever his wife had cooked it. He'd sit down at a meal, and before he did anything, before he even picked up his fork, he would grab his napkin, put it in his lap, and immediately grab that salt shaker and just go for it seemed like 35 seconds, right? And one time I jokingly said, would you like some fries with your salt? And he went, you and my wife. I don't want to hear that. But, before you even try it, you're just salted. Why? Because salt is pretty good. Like, let's just be honest about it. I mean, there's a reason we like salt, because it just hits the spot. But here's the thing. Have you ever had salt that didn't taste right? Trigger has. His hands up. Okay, you have. Okay, let me tell you something. Have you ever had ketchup that has no salt added? Does anybody like that? Listen, if you've never had it, let me just save you time. Just go lick a rock outside. It'll be worth it. Okay? It was horrible. Okay, well, I remember one time, me and my cousins, we went camping and we cooked some food, and we got the ketchup, and I think we were having, I don't remember if it was fries or potatoes or something like that, and I dipped it in the ketchup and I shoved it in my mouth, and I just went, what is this? There was no salt in this ketchup. It was miserable. I don't even like tomatoes, but this was like, ugh. Just tomato paste. That's really what I felt like I was eating. And there's something about salt that's really important. Even in biblical times now, there's something about the taste aspect, sure, whenever we talk through who we are, but there's something that's also inspired here by Jesus' statement that it's just beyond ketchup without salt. So don't boil it down to something that stupid. Make sure that you understand that he's talking about the taste and who we are in the world. Sure, we bring flavor. Aren't you glad that as a follower of Christ, you bring flavor to the world? You're no longer bland. There's your permission to just be like, I'm pretty cool today. All right? You might be a little boring about some things here and there, but whenever you've got Jesus in your life, you bring flavor to the world. That's something that they're longing for, a taste of something that's better. But the other thing that we know about salt is that it preserves, kills bacteria in food. And for us, whenever Jesus points us out, the kingdom aspect of who we are, we prevent and we confront things about this world that is desperately needing to prevent and confront. Whenever Jesus calls you the salt and you bring something to this world, and what you are doing is you're helping to squash all the bad things. Now, it doesn't mean that you will do that by every single Facebook post that you share and write out. Could everybody agree to that today? Have you ever read a Facebook post and go, that really changed my mind. I have a completely new perspective. I no longer feel that way about my opinion. No, you haven't. And so I would just tell you, stop wasting all your time there. First of all. And second of all, make sure that all of your opinions are not just being formed on those things too. You'll say that about people who you know, and you're like, they've got so many opinions. But then where did you get your facts from? Well, I saw a video on Facebook one time, or on Twitter, or whatever. I was watching TikTok the other day, and I watched this great video by a guy who was, okay, you've said enough, right? How about this? The other day I was in my work. I sat down with my Bible, and I was reading through, and the Lord really showed me something about himself. And now all of a sudden, you got my interest. There's some flavor in that. There's also this confronting thing that happens whenever that happens, like, whoa. And let me just tell you, the gospel is pretty offensive. The truth of God in a world that is so desperately broken and diseased, is the way Jesus is kind of pointing this out here, is something that we are responsible of carrying forward. Of sharing the truth of those things so that whenever the yuck, the gross, the bacteria of this world is there and it's confronted by God's truth, you get the privilege to do that. The privilege, not the right. Privilege. You like to go around trying to change everybody with one Facebook post or another, or you know what, this or that or this or that. Hey, if you want to know something, I'm appalled by everything that's been out in the world in the last couple of weeks. It's disgusting, all the different things. I'm grossed out by the amount of Christians that are ugly about all the things that have been going on in the last couple of weeks. But I'll also tell you, man, I have been cheering for our swimmers and our basketball team. I've also been, I love a good conspiracy theory. I don't know why. There's just something, admit it, and you probably do too. There's just something you're like, what if? Well, what if this or what if that? But at the same time, guess what? My ultimate truth is here. Because whenever I confront people with stuff in my life, it's not going to be, well, did you know Republicans or Democrats or blah, blah, blah. You just became part of the white noise of this world. Do you know what's more impacting? You know what God's word says about me? You know what I realize is I'm a broken person, and I want to share that, oh man, you talk about flavor. All of a sudden, I want some more of that. I'm longing for that taste of the goodness of God. Everybody is. So, the point here that Jesus is trying to make is you bring something that's really important. You got to be genuine with it, because you're a citizen of the kingdom of God. And then he goes on, and another word picture in verses 14 through 16, where he says, he starts in about this light. Now, salt and light, they're similar because it describes who we are as believers in this world. And even the world is used in different ways. He says the world, or similar ways, the world, in verse 13 and in verse 14, where he's talking through the salt and the light aspect of who we are. We need to understand the light of who God is and the light of who we are really is one. But what I tend to do is I don't really shine very brightly for the Lord. I don't feel like. I feel like I can do better in both of these, flavor and preserving and the light aspect of who I am. And so I would just encourage you, whenever he talks about these things, that he also wants us to understand there's a guiding aspect of life. I love my aunt collected lighthouses growing up. I always thought it was weird because we live in the middle of Oklahoma. That she would love lighthouses and decorate her whole house with it. I'm like, I can see like the ranch home thing, or even like a very western thing. Cows, horses, geese, even. I don't know. But lighthouses always like confused me. But one of the reasons why she loved it so much was the purpose of a lighthouse. A lighthouse guides and it directs and it warns and it does all the different things. And so if you're out at sea and you don't know how to get back to port or to land, the lighthouse, the purpose is to say, hey, over here, you can come back over this way. And it guides. And it also warns of issues. If you're trucking through the middle of a bay in your boat or your cruise ship or whatever, and all of a sudden there's a beacon there, a light in the middle of all the darkness, and the rocks warning you of peril that is there, then it prevents you from those things. But the purpose of life in this world is very important. And whenever he calls you the light, you have to understand your function. You're to help do that. You're supposed to guide, you're supposed to direct, you're supposed to bring concerns and warnings to people, and you help other people see the way. Whenever Jesus says that, he uses two different illustrations there: a city on a hill and a lamp on its stand to fulfill their function. And he also points out there's a position there that both have. It's an elevated position, right? Now, don't over spiritualize anything there. Just because you're a believer in Christ doesn't mean you're an elevated position. But the purpose of it is you have to make sure that you are rising above everything else that's going on around you. You have to make sure that what you're doing is you're bringing all of these things to people's attention to guide them. Don't camouflage everything in your life. I've gotten beaten up with hunting and fishing the last year and a half of my life. I remember when my first few pieces of clothing that were camouflage were given to me from a church member that they had replaced with other clothing. Really, I got their hand-me-downs, and I remember thinking, well, I won't need this camouflage. I probably won't do any of that kind of hunting or that time of year, or whatever. Well, the camouflage is pretty nice, right? You get to blend in with the surroundings. You get to kind of even just sneak around. That's the purpose of it. In fact, nobody who's even hunting out there, if you're doing that right, even knows you're there. But the church can't be that way. We just can't be that way. There are so many times whenever I've been going through something difficult in my life, and I came to church, and I tried to sneak in a little late, hide somewhere where people wouldn't talk to me or see me or anything like that. I kind of tried to camouflage in. I carried my Bible, carried a coffee cup, what everybody else was doing, right? To make sure that I just looked like everybody else, so that nobody would really start a conversation. Because if anybody said, how's it going today? I'd have to either lie, unload the truth on them. But here's what we've got to do. One, I just encourage you to be okay to take that camouflage off and bring light into your life. Because whenever the light is brought into your life, and the darkness of even your personal life, it exposes things. Sometimes we're well aware of those things, and then other times we're not, and it hurts, and it's painful, and it's weird, and it's uncomfortable, and we don't know how to deal with it. So then what we do is we camouflage in with the rest of the world, forget the church, and then we turn into deeper and more hideous, awful things that we never thought And all of a sudden we're standing in a place and we go, how'd I get here? So individually, would you just listen to me for just a second and just say this? I'm glad you're here today. Let your guard down. Take the camo off for a second. And just let the light of the Lord saturate your soul, every corner, so that He can begin to help you become who He wants you to be. You can let go of some things that you're holding on to. And then I would say this. Past that, corporately, He says that we're a city on a hill. I see the ruins of the Mayans and different places where they like carve stuff out into cliffs and things like that. I want to picture that, but it's not that, because even that is still camouflage and very intentional. And somebody who's way smarter can tell you all the reasons they did that, but that's not what I should picture in my mind. It's not a city in the side of a cliff. It's on top of that thing, way up there. Hey, we're up here. That's a vulnerable spot. Do you realize that? Like, that opens you up for attack. Are you okay with that? Church? We're lighting our lights and we're going to sit up here where everybody can see us. And guess what's going to happen? Everybody's going to attack that person. That city, they're going to be under siege all the time. And so whenever everybody says, well, they'll pick on Christians, yes, they will. Yep. Now, how are you going to respond in your life? Are you going to be the church? Are you going to live out love? Are you going to show them the light that is in your hearts? Or are you just going to play the victim score? Because, man, you're always mean to Christians. And they'll let other people with whatever stance and gender and sexuality and this and that, they can do whatever. And hey, guess what? We're pretty firm on some things. But we got the love of Jesus and the light of Jesus in us. So sure, you're going to come at us. But we're not afraid. We're right here. You don't light a lamp and then put it on its stand and then put it underneath a bowl. Hide it under a bushel? No. I'm going to let it shine. You remember that old song? Okay, thank you. I see a couple people doing this. And, all right? This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Jesus in you. You don't try to hide it anymore. Take the camo off and get out there and let other people see the good, the light of Jesus in you. I'm going to tell you right now, I know that she's not here, but her kids are. Okay? Folks, can I ask you a question? How many times a week do you hear your mom say, be the light and love of Jesus? Every day. Every single day that you're with her. Maybe she didn't text you that this morning. And she says, be the light and the love of Jesus. I've heard her tell you guys that. She's told me that before. Days I needed to hear it. Has anybody ever been told be the light and love of Jesus from Shelly Oak? All right. She preached my sermon for me. You got a choice whenever you wake up. Am I going to be the victim? Am I going to mope around? Am I going to choose joy today? I'm going to be the light and the love of Jesus. Because whenever we do, they will praise our Father who is in heaven. Go back there. You're the light. Verse 14. You're the light of the world. City on the hill can't be hidden. Don't put a light on a lamp. Don't light a lamp, put it in a basket, put it on a stand, and it gives light to the whole house. In the same way, let your light shine before others. They may see your good works and give glory to the Father who is in heaven. Let your light shine before them. In chapter 6, if you look over there, there's actually a warning, and this is where I just want to make sure that you understand this before we wrap up everything here in just a minute. In chapter 6, verse 1 through 6, I'm going to read it. It's not in the computer, so listen up if you don't have it pulled up. Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them. For then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. Okay, so is the Bible contradicting itself? Because these are the things whenever I got to college, I had a professor who would discount all of Scripture because she would bring up things like this. Well, he just said, put it out there for everybody to see. And then just a few verses later, he says, beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them, for then you will not enter. So is Jesus contradicting himself? Is the Bible wrong? And whenever I was a young adult, I thought, maybe, I mean, that's right. But let me tell you the difference here. In the first part, you have to give praise to the Father, right? The purpose there is you do these things so that people would see that and go, man, God is really amazing. God is really good. Wow. The warning in chapter 6 is beware of practicing, the warning there, your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by me. For then you'll have no reward. If you're doing it only for the words of affirmation, to feel the love of the world, then you're doing it for the wrong reason. So we're the church. How do we do these things? Well, we live a life of righteousness, yes. But we have to be aware that what the world is wanting us to do is to make sure that we do that Instagram post, or we do tell everybody, like, did you hear how much I gave to the offering to make sure that that family was taken care of? Or do you know how many mission trips I went on in the last 5 years of my life? I'm pretty holy. Do you see how good I am? I'm pretty righteous. Right? You're right. You see, you feel that? Like, you don't do that. But what you do is you do all those things, and then you say, oh, but let me tell you why, because my God is so good. He's the king of my heart. And my reward for doing those things, our reward for those things, is to make sure that we get the chance to call him Father. In verse 16 of chapter 5, whenever he says this, that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. And that's the first time Matthew uses the word Father there in his gospel here. I was reading earlier, he says it like several dozen times. I can't remember the number of times, but the first time he says it in the gospel here. The idea that we have to understand in our life is a very intimate thing that we're involved in. I grew up without a father. I grew up without a dad. And so whenever I see passages like this, I wonder, what's my purpose? What's the point? Well, it's so that I can give my Father in heaven glory. I always wanted to get an attaboy from my dad. A well done. To see that man who would call me his son, just at something, much less cheering me on. I was 13. I got a card from him that made me furious. It hurt. Because I hadn't seen him in 9 years. So who's this guy? Thinks he can step in now. Your father? Me? No. So to know that God is my Father, and the purpose of that is to give him glory and to thank him for what all he's done and who he is in my life. It hits me very deep in my soul to know those things about my God. So how do I live my life, church? How do we live our life? Well, we bring something that the rest of the world can't have without him. You bring flavor, you preserve the good, you be the light and the love of Jesus wherever you're at. And whenever he does, do those things in your life and he gets the credit. I want to give testimony to who he is in my life. And the church as a whole, not First Baptist Church, but the kingdom grows because of who he is in our life. And he gets more and more and more glory in our life. I'm going to brag on Jesus for a minute. A few years ago, I met my friend Matt Shockley and watched him just serve quietly in the background, love people very well, and has done things with our children's ministry. He's done things with a tractor and chainsaws and grunt work. He's shown up for people who are hurting, end of life, But one of the things, the coolest, the best that I've ever experienced with my friendship with you, brother, happened this week. Whenever I got a phone call from Matt. If you don't know, Matt's our fire chief, the Northwest Fire District. And he called me and said, hey, what you got going on? And I said, not much, man, what's up? He goes, hey, I got somebody who might want to be baptized pretty soon. And I said, okay, I'll be by here in just a little bit. I had a couple of meetings, got over there, and I met one of our firefighters in town, shared the gospel with him. He had already given his life to Christ, but he recommitted his life to Christ, and he was ready and wanting to be baptized immediately. You read that story in Acts, I know you guys did it in your small group last week, I think, where the Ethiopian's like, hey, here's water, why can't I be baptized right now? I've never really met somebody who was like, let's do that immediately, right? And so he shared that with his family and his wife and his 2 kids. They wanted to know more about this decision he was making, and they wanted to commit in that together. His name is Josh Copeland. I did not ask his permission, but you know, I don't think he'd care if he knew I was bragging about Jesus through him. It's like, this is Josh on the screen here. Me, that's me. Just in case, if your eyesight's really bad, he's the one without hair. Mine's the gray hair on the left. Myself, this is Josh Copeland, his wife Cassidy, their son Jaden, and their daughter JC. I got to meet Josh on Monday. Thursday, we met together at the fire department, and he wanted to be baptized. Cassidy recommitted her life to Christ, and she wanted to be baptized with her husband. And so, in a moment's time, now you've got a man who is surrendering his heart and his life to Christ, and wanting to take the next step of who that person now is in Christ. And his wife says, I want to do that too. JC, the little girl on the right, anybody know her? She go to class with you? Go to school with you? All right? You know her from school or around town? She's a sweetheart. She gave her life to Christ last year. She had never been baptized. And so she said, I want to be baptized with my mom and dad. And Jaden didn't want to be left out, so he was a part of the conversation. I got to share the gospel with Jaden in the conference room at the fire station. And I explained everything to him, and we had some good questions back and forth. And I said, Jaden, have you ever asked Jesus to forgive you of your sin, save you in your life? And he said, no. And I said, then we're not going to swim together here in just a few minutes. That's going to be a little awkward. We can go to a water park, or we can do whatever in my pool anytime you want to, if you just want to hang out and have a party. But baptism is something that I want you to understand. It is a testimony of what Jesus has done in your heart and in your life. And I ask you, would you like to give your heart to Jesus and let him save you for sin? He said yes. So on Thursday evening, Jaden prayed. Anybody know Jaden? He's going to get dedicated this year. He's your new brother in Jesus. And on Thursday, these 4 people decided we're putting our family not on a pedestal, but on the top of a hill. There's a difference. And never once did they say, man, we're so much better. The 4 of them shared a heart. It was, man, we need to be better. Not we are, but we are so much better than other people. We need to be better. We need to take a step closer. Now, listen, friends. I tried to explain to them, you know it. For a whole family to decide to step one step closer together towards Jesus is a miracle of God. And a man leading, a grown man leading in the middle of this. There are 2 players that God used in the middle of all of this. One was Matt Shockley, and 2 was that little girl on the right. Whenever they drove by church one day, she said, we need to be back in church. And it broke his heart. And God began to convict him, and he stepped towards the Lord. I love this next picture. It's right here. I got to baptize all 4. I'm going to try not to be emotional. I got to baptize all 4 of them in a what do you call that? A dunk tank. All right, yeah. A baptistry at the fire station on Thursday night. That is a heart that has changed. Is it perfect? No. I don't want want you to think that you have to be. But do you see the light of Jesus in this photo? Do you see how one little bit of salt and flavor changes the world? Friends, listen to me for just a second. If we're really going to say we're God's church, then you have to be ready, you have to be willing, you have to be the light. God bless you, man. I love you, bro. And I know you hate everything I just did to you, but I love you. But you have to be willing, no matter how scary it is, to step out and say, I need to do something different. This is insane. I trust Jesus. And I'm going to step forward. I'm going to tell everybody about it. What you don't see in that picture, there's about 60 people in that room watching. Some are followers of Christ. They're cheering him on. Some are not. They're just good friends who know it was important to him. And they're going to cheer him on. You got a chance with people around you. And I'm just going to ask you, like my good friend Dr. Hogan would say, be the salt, the light of Jesus. Have you been? Have you been the light and the love of Christ to those around you? Because if not, then you haven't really been being the church. I got tagged in a post, or the church did. Got tagged in a post from the fire department. But I have hesitated even to post about it, because I wanted to make sure my heart was right. But oh my goodness, how can you not see the love and the joy of Jesus in a moment like that? Oh guys, God is so good. And Jesus is real. And he wants to make a difference in your life. He wants to change you. And he can. But you have to let him join you. I just want to have Cody ask the mom, we're going to have a time of response. And
Go ahead and unmute him.
I don't really know how to end this other than say, what are you going to do to get to it? What do I need to do to make sure that I am shining brightly for Jesus today? If you don't have the light of the Lord in you, you've never given your life to Christ, then I just watched a 14-year-old kid say, I need that. In the middle of, a very scary moment, right? And then 20 minutes later, give testimony of that to a room full of people that he didn't even know most of. What are you going to do to step out and say, I identify with Jesus and here's the light I'm in my life? Whatever it takes. It won't be a Facebook opinion post. It's going to be a life that is lived in
Do I
love.
turn him down a little bit since it's just him?
around you.
Do I turn him down a little bit since it's just him?
Don't put yourself on a pedestal.
It should be okay.
Put Jesus
Unless,
at the top.
unless he starts playing and you think it's too loud.
Let's pray together. Would you stand up to your feet? We're going to respond to him right now. Jesus, thank you so much.